Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And it is so good to be back with you. My last podcast aired on July 6th of 2021. And obviously, I took some time off, but I'm happy to report that I'm back and I have a great guest lined up for you today. He's one of the country's preeminent arrangers, Paul Murtha. And I'll bring him to you in just a couple of minutes. But I don't know about you, but I have to say that I am suffering from a severe case of COVID fatigue. Oh, my wife and I have been fortunate enough not to have contracted COVID, or so we believe we haven't, and we've taken our vaccine shots and our boosters, but there simply has not been a vaccine to protect us from the constant barrage of COVID news. The pro-vaxxers, the anti-vaxxers, the wear a mask crowd, to the don't wear a mask crowd, to the let's see proof of your vaccination, to if you haven't been vaccinated, you'll need to have received a negative COVID test within the last 24 hours. And all I can say is stop. Please, dear Lord, let all of this stuff please just stop. And just as it seems that we're coming out of the darkness, a new variant, Omicron, is starting to emerge. So to all my friends and listeners who are still teaching or working with the public on a daily basis, God bless you. You are amazing people, and you have my highest level of respect. I spoke to a group of teachers the other day, and what they're going through right now is crazy. Wear a mask in rehearsal, everyone a minimum of 3 feet apart, outdoor concerts only. This school mandates masks. That school suggests that masks be worn. This principal knows exactly how the school should follow the protocols, and that principal doesn't have a clue. It's one way for the classes, including band and orchestra and choir, and as soon as after-school sports practices begin, not a mask in sight. It's enough to drive a person crazy. But, the good ones. You good ones. No, make that you great ones. You great teachers. You're not only going to survive, you're going to emerge successful because you are keeping your eye squarely on the prize. And that prize is the important role music plays in a person's life. And more importantly, because of your personal experience, you know the important role that music can and will and does play in your students' lives. You get it. And though you've been tested, you have refused to be counted out. And you will emerge victorious, knowing that you and your work has had a positive impact on a person's life and the life of your school and the life of your students' families and the community as a whole. Thank you, teachers, and thank you everyone who has a hand in this battle. We need you to continue to carrying on. God bless you. I'll be back with my Paul Murtha conversation right after this.
Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends is made possible through the generous support of the Eastman Music Company. From the first student instrument to the professional heirloom, Eastman Music Company is committed to crafting the finest instruments for musicians throughout the world. For more information, visit eastmanwinds.com.
Well, if you're a high school or middle school or even college band director and you don't know this name, you've been living under a rock for a long, long time. My next guest is just a great human being and a great composer and arranger. And if you go to like websites, like if you go to like JW Pepper and you type in his name, he's got like over 500 pieces on the Pepper website. And if you go to halleonard.com, he's got over 600 pieces there. So I don't think the guy sleeps. Either that or he started writing when he was 2 years old. But anyhow, my next guest is Paul Murtha. Paul, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Hey, Charlie, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an honor. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know the name and they don't know the person. And now we're going to give them an opportunity to get to know you, because you're a household name in the band world with all your compositions and arrangements that we'll talk about in a little bit. But let's start talking about where you grew up and how music became a part of your life.
All right. Well, first, thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I'm originally from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, a little town about 75 miles east of Pittsburgh. Started playing trumpet in 5th grade.
I knew I liked you for some reason.
I had some really great teachers. And often I'll just sit there and think of their names. And it's, if you've ever seen a rugby game, I picture myself as the ball, and this teacher handed me off to this guy, and this guy handed me off to this guy, and they finally got me across the finish line. Really great educators. A lot of them went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which is kind of between Pittsburgh and Johnstown. So yeah, I was so fortunate growing up in Johnstown with the teachers and the opportunities that were presented to me. They had a real strong community band program there also. So it was great.
Yeah, that Indiana University of Pennsylvania had quite a lineage. I mean, Dick Strange was there as their director of bands for many, many years. And then Jack Stamp was there, I guess, most recently. And it's just a great school with a great heritage.
Yeah, they used to call that Little Michigan. A lot of the teachers in I would say, early to mid 60s came out of Michigan. The guy that ran the band for a long time, Dan DeSico, great conductor, great musician, a lot of really great instrumental teachers there, tuba, percussion, trumpet. It's just and a great education school. If you wanted to be a band director in Western Pennsylvania, that was the place to go.
So what were your school band experiences like?
Well, I went to a small Vo-Tech school. I thought I was going to be an architect. My mother wanted me to be an architect. She did not want me to be a musician. So I thought
you're an architect now as a composer. So that's cool.
I kind of look at it that way. Yeah, it's a construction project. But yeah, we had this Vo-Tech school, and it wasn't your typical Vo-Tech school where you went half a day to your regular school and then you went for your shop or trade or technical area. This was 12 school districts in Cambria County up in Pennsylvania pulled their resources and put this school together. And it was a full-time school. You did all your academics there. They had their own sports teams. They had their own band and chorus. Quite honestly, the band was not great, but the band director and the choir director were the two best musicians in Johnstown. And it was kind of a last-minute decision for me. Well, I'll get to that later, but those two guys are probably the reason I'm a musician today. The band director was the best trumpet player in town, a good all-around commercial trumpet player. And I had the good fortune to, a lot of days on my lunch period, go down and get a lesson with him or just play along to the Music -1 things or Abersol things with him. The choir director we had there, Dick Napolitan, they called him Nappy. He ran a theory class, and I was, as a 10th grader, coming down there for my lunch period, and I see this guy scribbling notes on the board, and there's two kids in there. I'm like, wow, what's going on there? And he said, go ahead and sit down. And I ended up auditing the class that year. And then the next year, it was me and one other kid in the theory class. And my senior year, it was just me and him. It was great. He's also the guy that got me my first arranging lesson. He came to my house, picked me up, drove me to the lesson, and paid for the first lesson because my parents, as I mentioned before, were not all about it. So yeah, that Vo-Tech, Johnstown Vo-Tech High School, those two guys were great. really great musicians. And I played a lot of gigs with them too. They would get me on gigs, like paying gigs. So I didn't have to work at McDonald's as a high school kid. I went out and played gigs, which was a real education in a lot of ways.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So when did you know that, okay, Mom, this architecture thing ain't going to work out. I want to be a musician. When did you finally win that battle?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I won it. I would say my senior year of high school, and the architecture teacher was great. This guy was from the Pratt Institute in New York City. I had plans to go to Carnegie Mellon, which is a great school in Pittsburgh. They were going to help out with some scholarship money. My parents were all excited. And I'd say my senior year, I decided I wanted to go to school for music. I wanted to be Doc Severinsen. That didn't quite work out. But my senior year at Votech, I decided I wanted to go to school for music. And I decided I either wanted to go to Berkeley, Towson, University of Miami, or UNT. I didn't take a lot of lessons as a kid, but I must have just had a good setup. I could play. And about 2 weeks before the end of high school, I had an accident and lost an octave in range and could barely make the sound on the trumpet. So I was scuffling, and that's how I decided to go to Duquesne University, because they had a couple of guys there, Eddie and Matty Shiner, great brass teachers. Yeah. And they had a reputation for being able to fix you up, to rehabilitate you. So I get a friend of mine to drive me to Pittsburgh for an audition that I scheduled at the last minute. And I went in and I couldn't play a G on top of the staff, and I went into Mr. Shiner's office, and, a friend of mine had made the appointment for me that I sat next to in Pennsylvania Music Educators All State Band, PMEA. And he told the guy at that point I could play. So Mr. Shiner gave me an audition, came in, and I tried to play this etude, and then probably 16 bars in, he waves me off, says, okay. Says, Ralph told me you could play 6 months ago, and now you can't play. He says, I heard you can play a little bit of jazz. Do you want to play a tune? And he has a piano in the office, and I called some tune, and he sits down, and he's the trumpet instructor there. And he sits down, gives an intro, looks at me. I came in and played, and we got through it. And he stopped me, and he says, okay, I think we can do something with you. He says, I'm going to put you with my first student, a guy named Patsy Oliver, who was first call trumpet player, commercial trumpet player in Pittsburgh for years. And he had a similar thing happen to him, and they were able to rehabilitate him, and he was back. He says, Patsy will know what to do with you. And it was great. That was a great thing. And I think about, I mentioned earlier about them passing the ball, Eddie Shiner, Patsy Oliver, great teachers at Duquesne. That was another great set of educators for me.
So there were two Shiner brothers teaching at Duquesne?
Yes.
Because didn't Matty have the trombone studio?
Yes.
He had a trombone choir that was like unbelievable.
Yeah. And he also had a brass ensemble that was audition only, and rehearsal was 1 p.m. Sunday afternoons. If you showed up at 1 p.m., the door was locked. You better be there 10 minutes before, warmed up, tuned up, ready to go. You could knock on the door and he would just not even answer. And you knew your chair was gone. But he was great. Both those guys, they had been professional musicians coming up in the 20s and 30s, early radio. They had a lot of great students, a lot of great trombone players, Jim Pugh, Paul Huben on the trumpet players, just great legacy of brass players. So that was a no-brainer. When all of a sudden I couldn't play, I'm like, okay, I got to go study with these guys, and they got me straightened out.
That's great. I became familiar with Duquesne when Michael Coomer was the dean there.
Oh, he was great.
And Tim Lotzenheiser got me hooked into going and helping out at Mid-East. Remember Mid-East, that big
Dr.
festival
Don,
there?
Yeah, Dr. Dawn McCatherine at one point had
and
that.
What was his administrative assistant's name? She was a pistol.
I can't remember. I can see her because she was the hand in front of his office. If you needed to talk to him, you needed to get through her.
That's great. Oh man, that's a whole nother podcast. But so so when you went to Duquesne, you wanted to be a band director?
Honestly, no. I mentioned earlier I wanted to be Doc Severinsen.
Right.
So I went there, and honestly, the music education thing for me was a backup plan. I wanted to get fixed up, and I wanted to get a job in, one of the military bands in DC or go to the West Coast. But I also liked writing. So yeah, the music education thing, when I looked at it, I'm like, you know what, this is a good backup plan. And if I'm a music ed major, I'm going to go through woodwinds methods, brass methods, string methods, percussion methods. That's going to help my writing. I'm going to learn what these instruments do, and hopefully that when I write for them, I'll know what I'm asking them to do. So that was kind of my backup plan, but there was a little plus there for me was really the methods classes. So I really practiced my horn a lot, tried to get that straight, and took every writing course I could. I took courses out of order because I mentioned earlier, my parents weren't all about it. So I had to pay for this myself. And I didn't know how long I'd be able to go. So instead of taking all the freshman classes, I took as many theory classes, orchestration, arranging classes, anything that I thought was really functional for me to survive as a professional musician. I took those first. And then, things went on. I was able to get some money together, and I started, I was a senior taking some of the freshman classes, but, whatever. It worked out and I got the degree. So.
Well, you studied with some heavy hitters there. I mean, you had John Wilson and Joseph Wilcox Jenkins, and everybody knows Joseph Wilcox Jenkins as American Overture for Band, but wasn't John Wilson also, wasn't he a hell of a trumpet player? Oh,
he's a great trumpet player and a great arranger. He played with Sauter Finnegan, Benny Goodman, I think who else? Claude Thornhill, some really cool sounding groups, East Coast. He was a really great musician, great writer. We had the jazz band there at Duquesne, and one of the years I was in, I was playing trumpet. Eric Richards, who's a writer, was on trombone. Mike Tamaro, who's a writer, tenor sax. Jeff Watts, who went on to play with Wynton Marsalis, he was the drummer in the group. John Wilson, yeah, great guy. And I was fortunate enough to study privately with him for a while at Duquesne. I just went up to him and said, hey, could I get some private lessons with you? And he set up a time in the building, and I'd finish this one class and go sit in there with him for an hour and talk about things. Very knowledgeable guy. And as far as arranging, more towards the kind of hipper sounds, different instrument combinations within a jazz band, different ways to look at voicings. He might look at something, you might say, oh, this is C7 sharp 9 sharp 5. And he says, well, yeah, really, that's an A flat over C7 chord. You can think of it that way, to, dual tonality or polytonality, which was kind of opened up my ears and my thought process on a lot of stuff.
Cool.
Jenkins was great. He was quite a character. He used to just call himself JWJ, Joseph Wilcox Jenkins, JWJ. He was just a character. You had a class with him that would start at 10 a.m. He would walk in right at 10 a.m. and he would storm in the room and take it by force, and he was very particular. He would ask somebody what they thought about a certain chord progression or a harmonic device, and they would begin and say, well, it's kind of like, and he would just stop them. No, it's not like, it either is or it isn't. But he taught a great advanced theory class. I had him for that. Orchestration class was great. He was a real character, but a great musician. He also was in the service band, but he never mentioned that to us. He was an arranger at the Army band. In fact, I think when he wrote that American Overture, he might have been in the Army.
Yeah, I thought he wrote it for a military band. I'm not sure.
It might have been the field band.
Well, that opening lick, you better have some horn players right? Otherwise.
Yeah, and everybody plays it with a gliss.
Right.
And he actually talked to us about it at one point. He says, no, that was not the intent. It was just supposed to be ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. but the Gliss kind of sounds cool. So,
Covers a lot of mistakes too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Get there by hook or by crook.
So you graduate in 1983 with a music ed degree and a minor in jazz studies. So what happened to Paul Murtha then?
Well, I had to make a living because I had a girlfriend and we planned on getting married. So at that point, I actually was trying to get a high school band job, but there were no jobs open. The economy was really bad in Western Pennsylvania. The steel mills were on their way out. Teachers were holding on to their jobs well past the time that maybe they should have retired. So I ended up getting a couple of supplemental jobs in a couple different school districts. I had a private studio of 40 students a week teaching trumpet, French horn, trombone, euphonium, tuba. I played gigs with local bands. I wrote a lot for local marching band programs, Norwin High School, which was really big back in the day.
L.J. Hancock.
Yes.
Great friend of mine.
Mine too. He put me on the map with the marching band writing.
Wow.
And he gave me enough rope to hang myself. But he was a great guy to work for. They had a great program. So I did what any young musician does. You piece it together somehow and hope you don't double book yourself. So I did that for, I graduated in 83 and I joined the Army in 1990. So I did 7 years of that. At some point in there, I ended up playing with a pretty good local band in Western Pennsylvania called Billy Price and the Keystone Rhythm Band. And we played 5 and 6 nights a week. So at that point, I had to get rid of or pass it off my private lesson studio, which I really enjoyed. So I was playing 5 and 6 nights a week and then writing marching band charts. And then a lot of high schools hired me in fact, LJ was the first one to do this, hire me to write pop tunes for their jazz band, which probably 15, 20 years later became a very valuable skill for me with Hal Leonard.
That's before copyright laws, correct?
Well, no, they were there, just people ignored them. There were no copyright police or trolls out there at that point,
So you start writing for the United States Military Academy Band at West Point in 1990. And
Yes.
then you went on to Pershing Zone in DC, the United States Army Band, and became their chief arranger in 2001 and through 2016?
Yep.
And so how did all that transpire?
Well, the job at West Point, one of my best friends who was the high brass instructor at Norwin, a guy named Bruce Weissert, one of my best friends, he passed away about 2 years ago. He shows up one day with the local musician paper and says, "Hey, they're looking for an arranger at West Point." And I said, "What's West Point?" He goes, "It's an Army band." I'm like, "Oh man, I don't know, And I looked into it and I heard some recordings. I'm like, "Oh, this is a really fine band." So I had hair back then. So I cut my hair, took out the earring, put a suit on and went up for the audition at West Point. And they put me through the ringer. I mean, I get there, they take me around and give me a tour. And I thought it was, at one point, I thought it was just like college kids playing. I thought it was like a university band. So they take me into the first rehearsal and I'm looking around and there are guys there that are my age now. I'm 61 and I'm thinking, that guy's pretty old to be in college. What's going on? So I asked the guy who was my handler for the audition. I said, "What's the deal with the old guys in the band?" And he says, "Oh no, these are not cadets. These are professional musicians, Eastman, Juilliard, UNT, you name it." So I'm like, okay. And then they started to play and it was great. So they took me around on a tour of the concert band, showed me the jazz band. They had a marching band. They had a cadet glee club, which was also very good. And they handed me a stack of West Point centric tunes, things that were important to them. And they said, "Okay, go back to your hotel room tonight and write us a concert band opener using concert band." And they had this bugle group called the Hellcats, which were these bugles and rudimental drums, rope drums. And they said, "And it needs to end on a B flat timpani roll, and then we go right into the national anthem. So I'm like, okay. And this is before computers, really.
I was going to say, so how long was it supposed to be?
I think the thing was supposed to be 1:30, and then hit the timpani thing. And the timpani roll, they do an announcement, blah, 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 and then you're into the national anthem. So I went back to my hotel room, picked up a 6-pack of Heineken and a large pepperoni pizza, and started working on this thing, scribbling it out. And like I said, there was no computer, so it's all by hand. And they had people the next morning who were going to copy the parts. So I met them at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we said, okay, you got the woodwinds, you copy the saxes and horns, trumpets, doled it out. And at I think 9:30 that morning, I got to conduct the band on the opener. And it went really well. And when they stopped, the people started tapping their feet. I didn't know what that was. I'm a commercial musician. I've not played a lot in orchestras. And the guy next to me says, that means they like it. I said, okay, that's good. So they take me back to the commander's office. He says, okay, go back tonight and write a marching band fanfare to open up the marching band show when they take the field up at the stadium. So I did that, conducted them the next morning. And then the next night they said, okay, go back and write 32 to 64 bars of a big band chart and go in the next morning and do that. So I did that and they liked it. They offered me the job. And I said, well, can I get the job as a civilian? He said, no, you got to join the Army. So I'm 30 years old and I'm going to basic training with 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. But it turned out to be a great job. I was there for 6 years. I learned a whole lot. I just have a bachelor's degree, bachelor's of science, music education, jazz minor. I tell people I got my master's degree at the West Point Band and I got my doctorate at the Army Band in DC, because you write for these professional musicians and they let you know right off the bat when you've put them in a bad spot or ask them to do something that they're not built to do. And they also know where your car is parked. So both those experiences were great. I did West Point for 6 years.
Was Frank Doobie there then?
Yes, Frank's actually the first guy that I saw said, okay, that's a good conductor.
Yeah.
A lot of times, you're first trumpet player, you look at the conductor with a jaded eye sometimes. I saw this guy conducting, it was a Granger piece. And I just sat there, I'm like, this is really good. I mean, the band is great, but what he's doing was very musical. I got along great with Frank. And he retired and went out to Arizona. And I think he was in music ed for a while. And I ended up writing a bunch of marching band shows for him.
Yeah, he took a job at was it Southwest Louisiana or Northeast Louisiana? He was in Louisiana for a while. Mm-hmm. I know that because I applied for the same job that he did.
Okay.
And he got it, and I was second. He's hell of a musician.
Yes, he was great. So then an opening came up in DC, and it's a bigger band, and there's more opportunity just because it's bigger for advancement. They have strings, they have a harp, so I can get some experience writing for strings. So that audition was a funny audition. At the time, Mark Taylor, who's one of my best friends and now lives 10 minutes from me in Calabash, that's a whole nother story. He's the chief arranger there. So I send a packet down for the job and they invite me down. But my real audition took place in a Pizza Hut in Woodbridge, Virginia. I met Mark there and a good friend of mine, a trombone player who I was staying with. And again, pizza and beer comes in. I don't know what the deal is, but over a pizza and beer, he's looking at the scores and he says, yeah, that looks good. You want the job? And I said, so I don't have to come in and write or do anything overnight? He goes, nope. You want the job? I'm like, sure. So I worked for him for 5 years, from 96 to 2001, and he retired in 2001. And at that point, I became the chief arranger there. And I learned a lot from Mark, besides musical things, great jazz writer. He didn't love to write for concert band, but he had to, but great jazz writer and a really great musician. And he also taught me, I think he knew he was going to leave at that point, He figures, okay, I got 5 years. I can show this guy the ropes and teach him how to navigate this Army band system, so you can create some good music and have a good time and enjoy yourself there, But he was a great guy to work for.
So as a chief arranger, I mean, what exactly were your duties? And do you have a set writing schedule? You have a staff of arrangers under you? How's that work?
Well, yeah, I had two arrangers under me. Another great writer who when I left West Point, I hired Michael Brown, who's also a Hal Leonard writer. Great marching band guy, great concert band guy, studied with Jay Bocook. I hired Michael to take my place at West Point. And then when James Jose left the Army band, I called Michael and said, you got to come down here, So yeah, Michael Brown worked for me there. And another young guy that I hired from UNT, James Kasich. We hired him because Michael and I are both really arrangers, and Jim was a composer. And we're like, we need somebody who's really a composer in here too. So we hired James Kasich. And then I had a staff of sometimes 2, sometimes 3 librarians. So as far as a writing schedule, it was nonstop. I mean, we knew the Army band is just this thing that just rolls on. It's very cyclical, that, okay, this from here to here, you're going to be working on this. At this point, you're going to have this show that we're going to do. Okay, here's the inaugurals coming up. The holiday show, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, National Tree Lighting, all these things were cyclical. And then there's the day-to-day stuff where somebody says, oh, such and such general's coming in and this is his favorite song and we'd like to play this for him. Or they had strings there, and they have a group called the Strolling Strings, which would play White House dinners. So you got to write for the Strolling Strings too, and those things would pop up at the last minute. So the ability to turn things around quickly and not have a lot of hands go up in the room when they read the chart was very important. So the writing schedule, it just went on. Maybe after the holiday show, you might have a break to retool and install the next version of Finale and figure out what the bugs were going to be. But but it was a great job. I mentioned earlier, I felt like I got my doctorate there because it was a big band. They had a great concert band, a ceremonial band, which does Arlington National Cemetery. They had the Herald Trumpets, which are a great group to write for. They had a nice orchestra, SATB chorus, TTBB chorus, brass quintet, wind quintet. They had an accordion. I remember when I first got there, I'd never written for the accordion, and it was important with the Strolling Strings. So I went and studied with the guy who used to be in charge of the Strolling Strings, who played accordion and also was a really good arranger. So I studied with him to learn how to write for the accordion. That was such an education. And the 20 years that I was there went by like in an instant. It was just nonstop.
Got any funny stories you can remember? I'm sure you do.
I'm trying to think one I can tell. I do. Did you know Tony Kaysen at all?
I did not.
Okay, well, he was the XO. He was the number 2 guy in charge of the band there for a number of years. And if we weren't writing and we were in the building, sometimes I would just go into a rehearsal and sit in the hall while the band was rehearsing and just listen and see what's going on. So I'm sitting there one time, and this guy, Colonel Kaysen, is conducting this piece. It's an arrangement, and he finishes it, and he turns around to me and goes, "Hey, Paul, nice chart." I said, "Is that mine?" And he just started laughing. I said, we write so much for the Army band, and I was also at the same time busy with Hal Leonard and then writing. You're just always going, and you can't keep track. It sounds silly to say, but sometimes you'll listen to it and not even realize that you wrote the chart. And I think we're all hypercritical. So I said to him, well, it sounded good, so I didn't think I wrote it. I thought it was somebody else's chart. I didn't find any flaws with it. Maybe had I listened to it some more, I might have.
That's an old Paul Lavender joke. I was talking to him one day, and I won't mention the guy, but he said, one of the guys told him, he says, "Man," he says, "that piece is so beautiful. I don't believe I wrote it." And Paul said, well, if it's that beautiful, I don't believe you would write it either.
Yeah, he comes up with some good ones.
Oh man, he's amazing. So when you get out of the Army, you start writing for other great artists like Patti LaBelle and Kathy Mattea, Lou Rawls, Kenny Loggins. Man, that's a who's who. And so when you get a call from somebody like that, or their agent or whomever, and they ask you to write for them, like what kind of questions do you ask them, and what kind of questions do they ask you?
Well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. All those people that you just mentioned and a slew of others were guest artists with the Army Band.
Oh, wow.
So that's how I came to write for those people. I also had and I still have this gig, 2 shows a year with the National Symphony, and I get to write a lot for people of that caliber, guest artists that come in. So they're not contacting me directly. They are hired to be a guest artist, maybe on a holiday show. They're the feature artist, or we're doing some specific show, and they're the guest. So I do end up interacting with them or their music director. And they're, when they're at that level, you hear all kind of awful stories, but they're generally nice folks, and they just want to make sure that they do a good job. So the conversation is really nuts and bolts. Hey, I know this is the original key of the song. Do you still do it in that key? Or have you changed it? We see these different versions. Where do you want to go? A lot of times you're doing, what we call a lift, a record copy, of their tune. And maybe you're scoring it for a band instead of, just a rhythm section with 3 horns. You've got the whole Army Band there, and you got to give everybody something to do. So the conversations really go along those lines: keys, length, style. If you're coming up with something new, you just ask them what they want. They're the guest artist. They're the guest in your house. You want to put the best silverware and plates on the table for them, you can. So yeah, that was a great part of being in the Army Band, getting to write for those types of folks. And also we would do our holiday show, the national Christmas tree lighting. And then also I would end up working with the National Symphony Orchestra for another guy who used to be at the Army Band, a guy named James Kessler, who's a great orchestral writer, great arranger. I was kind of like I still am kind of his right-hand guy as far as pop stuff. He's more of an orchestral Broadway. So if you got like the Beach Boys coming in with the National Symphony, or Huey Lewis and the News, that's not his thing. So I get to do all those, the pop, country, rock, rap artists, whatever. So I end up working to make basically an orchestral backdrop for their tunes. Because once again, you've got this large ensemble there, and you got to give those folks something to do. They can't just be sitting there while the guest artist is there. They need to be gainfully employed without getting in the way.
So let's change direction a little bit. You're one of Hal Leonard's premier writers. I mean, you have, like I said, you've got like 600 pieces with them over the years. So when they contact you about a composition or arrangement, in addition to making sure you meet the deadline, which is a must, right?
That's why they call it a deadline. You don't make it, you're dead.
So what are some of your other primary goals when you're writing for them?
I want to make sure that it's playable. The chart, I want to make sure it's playable, because I know the situation band directors are in, high school and middle school band directors. I know how precious rehearsal time is. So for me, A, I want to make sure it's playable. B, I want to make sure that the audience is going to enjoy it. Because if you don't have an audience, at some point you're not going to have a band. And I try not to ask anybody in the ensemble to do something I personally wouldn't want to do. I don't write crazy trumpet parts. I know what that is. And I feel honestly that I'm never finished with a chart, even if it's I've written a chart on Who Let the Dogs Out. Okay. If you remember that tune.
Oh yeah.
But for me, it's not finished until I get a reaction, maybe an emotional reaction, personal emotional reaction, or I think, you know what, I wouldn't mind programming this. I go out and do clinics and guest conducting, and I program all my own stuff. just because that's part of the charm of having me come out. The kids can ask me, hey, why did you do that? What's the idea behind this? But I want to make sure that it's done on time, it's playable, the audience is going to enjoy it, the students are going to enjoy it, and it's something I would program. Those are kind of my things. And if I meet all those, I'm pretty sure that it's going to be an okay chart.
So like everybody else, I'm sure you got those moments where you just hit that mental roadblock. So, I mean, what do you do to push through it besides get a 6-pack of Heineken and a pepperoni pizza? I mean,
well, okay. You and I are on video right now. You can see that chair behind me?
I can.
I'm in my office. I'm in front of my computer and keyboard, but that chair, I call that the thinking chair. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you just need to get away from the keyboard, go sit down and think about something else. Or I find going for a walk, a bike ride, kind of frees your mind for what some people call lateral thinking. When you've got a problem and you're not actively thinking about it, you're thinking about, oh, I'm walking on the beach, or I'm riding down this road on my bike. It's a beautiful day. And then boom, maybe the solution comes to you. When you're not working so hard to figure it out, your unconscious brain or whatever comes up with the solution. So I like to step away from it, because sometimes just sitting there looking at a blank screen is so frustrating. And it happens to everybody. It happens a lot when you're under pressure and you've got a serious deadline. That's when you have to just say, you know what, go with your first idea. And that's a Sammy Nestico thing. He talks about go with your first instinct. That's 99 times out of 100 the right way to go. He had an interesting trick too. Before he would write a chart, he would mess around with it maybe late in the evening before he went to bed. Familiarize himself with the chart, just think about it, listen to different versions. He'd go to bed, wake up the next morning, and start the chart. And he said sometimes he would have a clear view of from the intro to the ending. So that's another kind of, I'm not going to think about anything. I'm going to go to bed and let my unconscious brain maybe, give me some ideas. When I wake up in the morning, I know at least where I'm going to start and where I'm going to end. And that's a big thing too. A lot of people think when you write a chart, you need to start at the beginning and go to the end. Now, sometimes you find the high point of the chart, find the ending, and the rest works itself out, because you know where you're going, where the end is, what resources you've used, what's available and who you haven't beat up so far. So yeah, those things work for me.
That's that architecture background again.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Yeah, there's a great YouTube video by the comedian John Cleese. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where he talks about being in the open mode and the closed mode. It's about 15, 20 minutes. It's worth watching. He's funny, but he just talks about how we have to go from the open mode to the closed mode and the closed mode to the open mode. And it's exactly kind of what you're talking about. You're at it. You got to get yourself away from it. You got to open up, and then it comes back, and it's all good. Yeah.
I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, it's a good one. So how often do you write something and then you sit for a day or two and you revisit it and you go like, what the hell was I thinking doing that?
It happens. The weird thing is a lot of times you don't have 2 days. I mentioned a little bit earlier about just going with your first instinct. A lot of times you don't have that luxury. What I do find is, and I was doing it yesterday, I'm programming for a guest conducting thing I'm doing down in South Carolina, a younger group, and I'm listening to a couple of my charts. I'm like, why the heck did I do that? Why didn't I put a snare drum roll leading into this next section? So for me, a lot of times it happens years after the chart's written, and I'll go back and look at it. I'm like, son of a gun, I should have. And sometimes when I have those opportunities, like I'm going to work with this band, I'm going to ask them to insert that. I'm going to do a little on the stand editing. But it happens. That's a thing that some young writers are so enamored with every note they write that they're afraid to change anything. You can't fall in love with everything you do. And then, like I said, sometimes years later, you're like, oh, geez, that was bad. I should have fixed that, or I should have caught that. You know?
Yeah. You know, when you were a young writer, you obviously cut your teeth with the pen and paper.
Mhm.
And now kids are cutting their teeth on Finale and other software programs. As you work with the young wannabe composers or arrangers, you know, what are some of the pitfalls that they fall into?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is I can remember many people coming up to me, actually at the Army band, saying, "Hey, I just got Finale. I'm ready to start arranging." I said, "You know what? Don't even open it up. Get a piece of paper, get a pencil, start there. Come up with your ideas and your roadmap. Otherwise, you're going to paint yourself into a corner." It's like if you've ever laid floor tile and you started in the wrong place, or you ever painted a floor and you started in the wrong place, all of a sudden you're painted into a corner and you can't get out of the room. One of the pitfalls, well, there are a couple, but the one I will always tell young writers is learn what those instruments do. Write characteristically for those instruments. I have a little thing on my website. I think it's called "What's My Job?" Okay, when you look at the different families of instruments in a band, if you have trumpets, okay, who else in the concert band is going to do a better job at a fanfare type figure than trumpets? Nobody. Okay, who else is going to do a better job at fast runs that cover a lot of distance? High woodwinds. Who else is going to do a better job at the bass line than the tuba, bass, clarinet? Nobody. You know, each of those families of instruments have their primary job that they do. You know, some people think of them as melody instruments, accompaniment instruments, you know, classic French horns, you know, the bane of their existence. But each family of instruments also has several things they do really well. I mean, you know, trumpet solo, it's a melody instrument. You need a fanfare thing. Okay, that's it. What you don't do for trumpets is give them long high notes, okay, because they don't like it. It beats them up. So I encourage young writers to understand what each family of instruments can do best and the other jobs they do. It doesn't matter what kind of job you're in. Let's even take it out of music. If you're, let's say you're a manager at a retail store. Okay, yeah, you got to manage people, but you also have to be in charge of the physical security of the building. Maybe you have payroll things. You have all kinds of things and you have to do them. Same thing happens with these different instrument families. You have to realize what their primary function is, and then other roles you can use them in. And that helps you write a chart, understanding those other rules, so it's not monotonous. So the trumpets don't have the melody the whole time. So the French horns don't play backbeats the whole time. When you understand those things, you can shape your arrangement and give everybody interesting parts, and also understand that, hey, I need to give the trumpets a rest. And I tell young writers, the smaller the brass mouthpiece, the more rest you give them. Okay. The word economy, only use the instruments when you really need them. You know, don't just double everything because, you know, have a reason for it. And the other thing I tell them is don't rely on the software for playback. Oh, this sounds great on the computer. And then trumpet players hear it or have to play it live, and they're going to be looking for your car, you know, in the parking lot. Like, why did you do that to us? And the last thing I'll say about all that is understand that your arrangement or your composition, no matter how wonderful it is not going to be the only thing on the program. So, you know, be a good citizen and don't necessarily beat any one section up, you know. That's not a primary concern, but it's something that's always in the back of my head. Okay, when they finish this chart, what's left? Or can they even play after this? You know, so those are things I'll tell young writers to be cognizant of.
That's great. So as you look at the music world, past or present, who are some of the composers that are in your Mount Rushmore?
Oh man, Aaron Copland, John Williams, Bach, Mozart, Holst, Elgar, Tchaikovsky, all of them, for Leonard Bernstein. I like to look at a lot of American composers. I like the concept, you know, Aaron Copland being the first American classical composer, first widely accepted, and the way he took our elements here, folk songs and the concept of the great outdoors and the vast West, and try to incorporate that into his music. I think that's important. I love Elgar, Holst. I mean, some of the great early band writing, those Holst suites. I mean, they're great. So yeah, I mean, there's so many. Those are a couple that just come off the top of the head.
How about favorite artists? Anybody that in particular you love to listen to? Or is there somebody that you've discovered that maybe I should be listening to?
Are you talking instrumentalist or composers?
Could be anything.
I mean, I'm a trumpet geek, so I listen to trumpet players all the time. I really love John Williams' music just because of how he uses the brass. I'll tell you a guy that I really enjoy, and he's not, maybe he's considered mainstream. He's done a ton of film work. A guy named Carter Burwell. He writes, I think he's written for all the Coen brothers movies, which are typically a little dark, a little quirky. If you're familiar with the Twilight series that was all the rage, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, he writes the music for that. And he comes from a rock and roll background, kind of like Danny Elfman does. And he's got into this world of film composing, just kind of a weird circuitous path. He knows this guy, they're friends with this band. Hey, I'm a film composer. Can you write some music for the film? And the answer, if you're an arranger or composer, is always yes, I can do that. Sure. When do you need it and how much does it pay? But his stuff is really cool. It's not hyperchromatic or anything. A lot of it is diatonic, but then the melodic ideas, he'll go in weird directions and use weird notes that create a lot of really cool tension and release. And there's always a real emotional component to his stuff. So I enjoy listening to his stuff. Just
Carter Burwell.
Yes, Carter Burwell.
That's great.
Yeah.
I have to check him out.
Yeah, he's got some, one that comes to mind is this tune called Bella's Lullaby. And it's from the Twilight series. I did a chart on it for concert band for Hal Leonard a number of years ago. And it's not hard. It's probably like a grade 3, a lot of woodwind stuff. And there's an optional piano solo, but it's also doubled in the mallets. So you can do it either way. And it's pretty cool. Not the chart, the original music. I mean, it's just, I really enjoyed working on that piece. And that was the first time I was really aware of who he was. And I'm like, okay, I like this. Let me go check this guy out. What else has he done? And it covers the whole gamut, all kind of stuff, but really, really neat writer. I enjoy his stuff.
So there's some like cool movies coming out. So when you go to a movie and you listen, obviously you're listening to the soundtrack, you're like, man, this is a great tune. I got to write this, right? Do you call Hal Leonard? Does Hal Leonard call you, or how does that work?
Well, first of all, yeah, my wife sometimes wants to get up. I'm like, no, I want to listen to the end credits. Everybody else has left the theater and we're sitting there because I'm listening. But it does work both ways. I've heard things, and I'll call, Mike Sweeney is
he's a great human being.
He's a great guy, and he writes beautifully, especially for the middle school stuff. He writes interesting stuff that is playable, another great role model. But I'll call Mike because he's usually my contact, and I'll say, hey, have you heard this tune? Or do you guys have the rights to this? And that's an all important statement. Do you guys, Hal Leonard, have the rights to this piece of music? If so, I think this would be a great grade 3 concert band, or I think we could do this as a grade 2 jazz, or this would make a great marching band chart for In the Stands. So a lot of times I'll hear things like that. A lot of times Mike calls and they acquire a new property, like some movie, and they say, hey, we've acquired this and we need to put a concert band, marching band. Do you think it'll work for jazz, pops for ensembles? And you get that and the grade level, and you look at it, and I might call him back and say, Mike, it's going to be tough to sand this down enough to make it a grade 2. I think it's going to have to stay at grade 3, because for me, that's important too, is doing a chart. I want it to be authentic. If I'm writing something for concert band, I don't want to have to simplify it so much that when the kids play it, they're like, that's not the way it goes, because kids are sharp. Sometimes they hear it and they want to play it the way they hear it. And you're like, no, you have to play it here. So there's some common ground in there. But yeah, that's typically how it works. It goes both ways. Probably 90% of the time it's Mike calling me saying, how do you feel about this? Do you want to tackle this?
Yeah. And when you do play those arrangements where they've altered the rhythm to make it read easier for the kids still play it the more difficult way, the way they heard it, right? No matter what that is.
No, you've been there.
And it's really funny to kind of take this full circle. You mentioned that you were a student in school and you had this teacher that was doing a theory class and you were working with him. Mike Sweeney started with my buddy Les Taylor at Alexandria, Indiana. And I guess he did like a before school theory class with Les Taylor. And, he's done well. Those are great people. It's a small world we're in, buddy.
Oh, it sure is. It sure is. And they're what's the word, 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
I mentioned Michael Brown, who was a student of Jay Bocook. Mark Taylor was my boss at the Army Band. It's just, especially when you get into the arrangers and composers, it's a small world, but it's great. It is pretty neat to get to meet these different people and put a face with the chart that you've heard or played for years, so.
It's wonderful. Well, Paul, it's been great to put a voice with the name and to have this opportunity to chat with you, man. I have really, really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you, Charlie. I did too. Great questions and fun hanging out with you.
It's been great. Thanks, buddy. I wish you well and good luck on whatever you're writing today.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you.
Paul Murtha is one class act. As you listened to our conversation, I hope you heard his respect for his art and his respect for those who helped every step of the way. There's a lesson there for all of us, and it might be summed up best by my first high school principal who told me, Charlie, I learned a long time ago, we need to dance with them that brung you. Paul, thanks for once again pointing that out to us in your elegant, personal style. You're a good one, pal. Thanks so much. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. I'll be back with more guests and more great podcasts. And please, let your colleagues and friends know that I'm back with new podcasts and guests, and we're available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. So until the next time, this is Charlie Mangini saying, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.